Hello there. I have some pretty inexpensive espresso machines in front of me. Now, the sub $100 espresso machine market is pretty wide nowadays. There are a whole lot of options, but it turns out that most of them are pretty similar because for that price point, there are only so many ways that you can combine pulling espresso and steaming milk into one machine. That being said, just because it's cheap in the realm of espresso doesn't mean that you can't pull some pretty tasty stuff. So I thought we'd talk about them and also talk about some best practices. The plan for today is to break down sort of the anatomy and structure of what you get with these machines, and then, of course, 5 tips for getting the best coffee possible, because it is possible, and I want you to have that chance. Now, before we really dive into this, 2 caveats. Number 1, we are not going to be modding or breaking apart these machines. A lot of what we're going to talk about is very technique driven so that it's able to apply across all sorts of models. Secondly, I'm going into this video under the premise that you already have a grinder that is capable of grinding for espresso. Talking about grinders when it comes to espresso is like a whole nother can of worms. That would be 1, if not 10 more videos. So we might talk about that at a future point, but for the meantime, we're going to operate like we already have a grinder. That being said, let's get started. Create some workspace here. Now, we have 2 different machines here. And while I'm gonna show a few little differences in between them, as I said before, these are pretty similar. So once we get to actually pulling espresso, I will default over to 1. But what we have here today is the DeLonghi Stilosa and then the Casa Brews CM 1699, both under $100. And let's talk about what you get with them. Okay. Portafilters. Now, I have these 2 machines here today specifically because they show off 2 different styles of portafilters that you often find at this price point. The first one from the DeLonghi is going to be more similar to a traditional portafilter. If you take the basket out, you'll see that you have this sort of wire here around the rim that provides tension so that when the basket is in, you're knocking out your puck, you are doing whatever one does with a portafilter, the basket doesn't come out. On the other side though, we have the Casa Brews portafilter. This one, notably, does not have a wire inside, which means that when you place your basket in, it is pretty likely to come out, or at the very least, you have a lot more jangle going on. So you have this little switch right here that you can hold with your finger for when you're knocking out your puck or dosing your coffee. All right, the next thing you get with these machines. This is a little multi-tool that I have a very strong love-hate relationship with. Of course, the top very clearly functions as a scoop for whatever scooping activities you have, but the bottom is more what we're gonna be looking at here in a few minutes. This is gonna be your tamp. I know what you're thinking. Believe me, we're gonna make this work, we just have to think about it a little bit differently. But moving on. Now these 2 pieces are really the only external bits you get. There's not a lot of bells and whistles included in machines at this price point. The machines themselves are primarily built out of plastic, although you do have a stainless steel or a metal kind of surface up on top that acts as a pre-warmer for your cups. You have your water tanks on the back, usually a removable drip tray of some type, your group head, and then your steam wand. Believe me, I've got a lot to say about the steam wand here at the end. And then you have your controls usually along the front, and then also a knob on the side that will control the steam wand being on or off. Notably, with these machines, it is not possible to steam milk and pull espresso simultaneously. Those happen separately. And so usually the controls will indicate whether they are for the group head function or the steam wand function. There's usually an amount of preheating time that has to happen in between these steps. Not a ton, usually it's 30 to 40 seconds between pulling your espresso and steaming your milk. But again, as I said, functionally, very similar. So with that being said, we're gonna work on the DeLonghi today solely for the fact that it is already plugged in and preheated. So let me go get some coffee and let's get started with our 5 tips. I want to give a huge thank you to Trade for sponsoring today's video. If you've been around here for long enough, you're probably pretty familiar with Trade. With over 450 unique coffees to choose from over 55 independent roasters, a Trade subscription will allow you to explore the wide world of coffee from the comfort of your own home with freshly roasted coffee arriving on the schedule that works best for you. However, with summer basically on top of us, there's even more to explore than just traditional bags of coffee. Trade's cold coffee collection lets you explore all sorts of fun, from ready-to-drink
cans of snap-chilled Ethiopian iced coffee to full cold brew kits that take all the guesswork out of your brewing. I'm pretty partial to the Mitsudashi cold brew kit, which includes a 2-pound bag of coffee from Alma Roasters, and having these larger bags of coffee included for cold brew is fantastic, as you can brew large batches that'll last you quite a long time. But if the Mitsudashi brewer isn't your style, then I do really recommend you check out their cold coffee collection, because I can guarantee you'll find something up your alley. So head over to drinktrade.com/MDC to get 30% off your first order, or click the top link in the description. And thank you again to Trade for sponsoring today's video.
All right, welcome back. Now, tip number 1 today is that to pull good espresso on a cheap machine, you need a gram scale. I have one here that I brought for show and tell. Now, notably, I don't care what brand gram scale you get, but what I do care about is that it measures at least to the 10th of a gram, preferably to 100, but at least to a 10th. That way you're able to really finely control how much espresso is going into your basket and also how much espresso is coming out. Now, notably, especially in the espresso world, there are an infinite number of gizmos and gadgets and thingamabobs that have to do with pulling espresso. This is everything from distributors to dosers to tampers to anything you can imagine. However, when you get down to the very base of it, the one thing you always will need is a scale. And I'm gonna tag on a little bit extra here. I will say, if you're planning on making milk drinks, the other thing you will need to buy is a milk pitcher. This will be very important, especially if you are planning on pouring latte art. And they often aren't included in machines like this. Moving right along, tip number 2, use a double shot basket in your portafilter. I say this very strictly. I've got a lot of opinions about single shot baskets being used in machines like this, especially with people who are beginning with espresso. Now, before I talk exactly about what a double shot basket is, we need to talk a little bit about what this portafilter is. Now, this is what's known as a pressurized portafilter, or specifically, this right here is a double-walled basket. These are very common on these kind of lower-end machines, even kind of to mid-tier. Like, it's a scene pressurized portafilters is a common thing, and it's not necessarily, they're not bad. They're just a thing. Some people really like them, and I think for some folks it really fits their needs, whereas some people want a lot more control over their extraction, and so a pressurized portafilter probably isn't the way they're gonna go. But what essentially happens is you'll notice from the top down, the basket looks pretty normal. However, if you turn it around, you'll see a lot more going on at the bottom than just the holes that you see here on the top. It's a little bit hard to tell with this one. I'm gonna go grab the Casa Brews real fast. This basket right here is an even better example of a double-walled basket. So you'll see the top, and then you'll see how everything gets funneled through, ultimately through this one small hole at the bottom. Essentially, what this is doing is it's providing like a secondary level of pressure to your shot of espresso, and so the resulting liquid is pretty much always going to look like espresso. It's going to form a really thick, rich crema really consistently. However, a lot of that is due to this additional kind of artificial pressure rather than a really even, well-extracted shot of espresso. It's kind of like applying a gold star to a test when maybe you didn't get all the answers correct. Now, pressurized portafilters work really well for a lot of people. If you are someone who doesn't want to think too deeply about your coffee, you just want something that tastes pretty good and is pretty even each time, this is probably the way to go. That being said though, even within pressurized portafilters, there are often 2 options given. And DeLonghi has hidden one of the options in this little pocket up here. Many portafilters will come with 2 different basket sizes. You'll have a double shot basket and also a single shot basket. And I don't want to say throw this in the trash. I don't mean that, that's wasteful, but just, I don't want you to really think about this one. I want you to use this one. Single shot baskets hold about 7 grams of dry coffee, whereas double shot baskets hold anywhere from 13 to 15 grams. And I think starting with these really kind of like shoots you in the foot early on. Single shot baskets are notoriously difficult to dial in with because there is so little room for adjustment in the amount of coffee that's in here. It's really hard to tell what's actually happening with your extraction, and more often than not, I think you'll find yourself really frustrated and disappointed that what you are expecting isn't what is coming out. So we're gonna tuck this. We're gonna tuck this back up here. Having the flexibility of using a double shot basket will give you higher chances for success. And frankly, I would prefer you pull a double shot of espresso and split it if you want a single shot, rather than potentially wasting multiple shots trying to dial in a single shot basket. All right. Tip number 3 here is to double tamp your coffee when using a plastic tamp. Let me explain. And also let me dose in my coffee so we can do this. Now, I mentioned that I have a very strong love-hate relationship with this sort of tool, and for a lot of reasons. To kind of illustrate the main ones, let me grab a traditional tamp. If for some reason you haven't seen one before, this is what a more standard coffee tamp looks like. It's very heavy. It is also noticeably a lot shorter than this one is. This means you can really get your hand around it for a very even, like straight up and down tamp. The goal here is to apply even pressure across this bed of coffee, compacting it down so that in theory, everything is evenly extracted when that water hits the bed. Noticeably with this one, it's a little bit trickier to go from the top. First of all, this plastic has a ton of bend to it, meaning that it's going to be very hard to tamp straight down. But additionally, with your hand this high up, it's very difficult to see if you're actually tamping straight, which is going to be important. So then you get left with kind of like gripping down here at the bottom. And I think a lot of people's instincts are often to kind of go around the base and grip their hand like this. However, when you do this, because as you can see, there's like a lot of torque in the wrist, a lot of your pressure is really unevenly applied to the back part here. This means when you're tamping over your bed of coffee, one half of it is getting tamped down a lot more than the other half. Instead, what I prefer to do is to go much more over the tamp with my body. So I will kind of hold it in the front here and let the scoop rest along the backside of my wrist. This way, a lot of my weight is shifted forward and I'm pressing a lot more up and down rather than having it on the side and pressing kind of at a diagonal with my body. But let's demonstrate. Now, because we are working with a bare bones kit here, I'm gonna kind of hand distribute here, just light, gentle taps across the portafilter, looking to create a somewhat flat canvas to tamp onto. Give it a tap. I'll grab my portafilter first from the front, place flat in the center, and then with my body, lean over it and up. Now, here's where double tamping comes into play. It may be a bit tricky to see on camera here, but you may be able to see a large amount of untamped coffee kind of sitting up against the walls of the portafilter. This is super common with these sort of plastic tamps because being that they are plastic, there is a lot of variance in their actual size, especially manufacturer to manufacturer. That means that you are more often than not fully tamping the surface of your coffee, leaving a lot of untamped coffee and like gaps along the edges. So I'll go in one more time. And with nice even pressure, go around the edges, ensuring that I don't have any areas where channeling is going to be super likely. Clean the top. There you go. A nice evenly tamped bed of coffee. Now, I don't traditionally recommend double tamping if using a traditional tamp or really like anything else, but specifically when using these, I think it is really useful, especially since it's a pressurized portafilter, and if a ton of channeling happens, it's hard to tell where that's happening. Just set yourself up for success early. Now, tip number 4, and I promise this is the last one before we actually pull espresso, is that when in doubt about how much espresso is actually in your basket and whether it's a good amount to start with or not, use the coin test. The coin test is pretty simple. I will kind of preface this with that it is not a 100% foolproof way to know whether you have the right amount of coffee in the basket, but it is a good kind of indicator, at least visually. So we're gonna take a clean nickel, emphasis on, on clean here, and we're gonna set it just on top of our tamped coffee. And now we're gonna put it in the group head. Now we're going to remove it. Essentially what we are looking for in performing that action is whether there is a deep indent pressed into the puck of coffee from the coffee puck being too close to the shower screen, or if there is no indent at all, in which case you may need a bit more coffee. Essentially what we're looking for here is just the kind of visualization of where the coin was placed. If you can very lightly see where the coin was in that circular shape, great, you're probably in a pretty good spot off the bat. If there is a deep indent where the coin was placed, you probably have too much coffee in the basket. If there is no indent or no pressure at all, you could probably use a little bit more in the basket. It's just a nice little helpful trick there. Okay, I'm gonna make some espresso. I'm using a dose cup simply because I don't have any espresso cups short enough to fit underneath here. We've made some espresso. A little stirry stir, as usual, and a little taste. It is like 3:30 right now, so unfortunately I cannot finish this full shot, but it's pretty nice. Now again, with using pressurized baskets and with them kind of creating this crema no matter what scenario, you will have to rely quite a bit on taste and preference in dialing in your coffee. But that being said, that's yummy. If it wasn't 3 p.m., I would be finishing it. However, we've got some other stuff to look at here, so let's continue on to our tip number 5 about getting really nice drinks off of this machine. Okay, we're gonna move on to the steaming function of this machine. So let's get our steam function all preheated. Okay, let's move on to tip number 5, which is going to have to do with our steam wand down here. Now, this is a very distinct type of steam wand. It's called a Panarello, and it's very, very common, especially in more like traditional Italian-driven machines. Sometimes you'll even see this called like a cappuccino maker. Now, essentially what this does is beyond just like creating steam like a traditional steam wand does, is it will pull in additional air into the milk, and it really like doesn't allow for the more traditional like milk steaming and aeration methods that we would use in like modern specialty coffee. I'm gonna just like turn it on and kind of show you how it acts. Basically, it is a whole ton of steam without a lot of control. And just for illustration of what kind of milk texture it creates, I'm gonna steam some up. We've got a whole lot of bubbling going on right now. Basically, these steam wands are built to be kind of like foolproof ways of steaming milk, in that they don't need a lot of technique to get them to work, but in that they only really make one type of milk, and it's very traditional milk. I'm gonna pour this into a glass so you can kind of see the level of foam on this. Super thick, foamy, I would consider very like traditional Italian cappuccino type of milk. One of the main problems with this sort of steam wand tip is that there is very little control over what direction the steam is coming out at, meaning getting a traditional 5 to 10 second aeration at the beginning, and also getting that kind of whirlpool effect where you incorporate all of that air into the milk becomes super, super difficult, if not nearly impossible. So tip number 5, take this thing off. While that isn't so much better, having this like kind of single tip steam wand access will give you so much more control than the Panarello did. So let's steam up some milk one more time, but this time using our more naked steam wand. Immediately you'll hear like a much more traditional steam wand like tearing sound as you aerate. And with this single point of steam, you're able to really actually control the direction of your milk, which helps with that later swirling portion. I will say the rubber steam wand tip isn't the most appealing thing. Oh, I have made this very full indeed. far silkier, far more latte art pourable, far more control over what type of milk you get, whereas if you use the Panarello, you're kind of just stuck with one. And really all the techniques you've probably read about with milk steaming kind of go out the window. Although maybe keep the Panarello tip on hand, as this looks a little silly, doesn't it? Treat it more as like a protective cover, perhaps. And with that, those are my 5 top tips for getting tasty coffee off of very cheap espresso machines. It is totally possible with all things, and I will emphasize this. Oh my gosh, I have no one told me I had latte on me. Shame on you guys. As I was saying though, with all things, everything that we have talked about today is going to take practice. These are things that you will have to test out for yourself to both get like the physical like motions of, but also to really understand the principles of. So here are my recommendations. Go forth, play with them, and see what you come back with. But with that being said, I think that's everything. This was a lot of talking, so I hope this was useful to someone. And I still feel like I'm covered in latte. Regardless, my name is Morgan. You can find me here on YouTube once a week plus shorts, or you can find me on Instagram or TikTok almost every single day. This has been fun. I have quite a mess to clean up, and I'm gonna go enjoy a little bit more coffee. Again, it's like 3:30, so only a little bit, but I'll see you next time.